Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on and responding so quickly. I really appreciate it. You're running in Florida 19, but for Byron Donald's seat. But let's start at give us a little bit of your history. People know you were in Congress. You know, why did you move from North Carolina to Florida? I mean, what's your background real quick, and then we'll get into some of the national issues.
Absolutely. Well, first, I was born and raised in North Carolina, had an amazing life. I was on spring break down in Florida when I was 18 years old. Just two Christian young guys, weren't doing anything crazy, weren't drinking or anything. We're driving back home in the middle of the day, and for whatever reason, my friend fell asleep behind the wheel of a car on I-4. We run into a concrete barricade around 70 or 80 miles an hour, and I wake up 3 months later, really coming back to with my consciousness in a hospital, and everything that I thought I was capable of doing was now ripped away from me. I couldn't move.
Wow.
Could barely function my left arm, which is thankfully recovered most of it all. But couldn't move my legs, and I obviously led to a lot of questions of, man, why did this happen? What can I do? But the thing that God did leave me was my voice. And so when I was 24 years old, I decided to step into the realm of politics because I was tired of having, a generation of politicians that had been there for longer than I'd been alive. And also, didn't understand the gravity of the situation that we're in, that the left is playing for keeps. The globalists are trying to take over this country, and they're trying to weaken the young men in this country. And I had to fight back. And so stepped into politics, fought very hard. Things were going really well. I had an amazing first year and a half in office. But then redistricting happened, and my district became significantly more moderate. I lost 3 of my most red counties, and we got a very liberal city. And so, anyways, I had 2 options. I could either change my tone, or I could stay true to my beliefs and who I was. But doing that inside of a moderate district was not very popular. So ended up losing that election, and then after that, I moved down to the state of Florida. I first visited here when I visited Byron Donalds to speak for him at a grocery store of all places, but it ended up being one of the best grocery stores I've ever been to. It's called Seed to Table. It's amazing. Love it
I
there.
know it. It's in Naples, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
So anyways, but once I came down and did that, I was planning on flying back the next day, but then I was like, I'm going to stay for a couple of days. And after those 2 days, riding jet skis, getting to interact with the amazing people around here, I decided, man, whenever I am done in North Carolina, I am moving to Southwest Florida. And so ended up moved to Cape Coral, loved it. 3 weeks after I moved into my house, or closed on the house, we got hit by Hurricane Ian. And it was devastating where I lived. And so I always tell people I got baptized as a Floridian. Really couldn't ask for anything better because, I got to see what this community was. Obviously, there was a lot of tragedy around Hurricane Ian, but being a newcomer here, getting to see how people came together to help one another. And I became extremely popular because, I had a boat that was filled with gas. So I was siphoning out, I'm a good old country boy. We all know how to do that. And so became very popular by neighbors, being able to supply the generators with gas and make sure, we were all able to have a safe community in this area. But watching how this community came together made me fall very in love with it and realize that these are my people. This is my home, never leaving. I've been here for nearly half a decade now, and I love it. But when Byron Donalds surprisingly announced that he was going to be running for governor after President Trump tweeted at him, encouraging him to run, we realized that, we got to have strong representation in this area. And I'll be honest with you, Todd, I was juggling the situation. I had a lot of things going on in my life at the time. I was selling a business. And, I was said, is this the right time for me to do this? I know I want to get back into politics at some time. But, I've got a lot of things on my plate right now. And I was juggling with the decision. I got up to DC, talked to some people, and I still wasn't sure. And then they shot my friend. When my friend Charlie Kirk got assassinated, I realized there is no freaking option. There is only one way forward, and it's to let our most aggressive, most shrewd, most tactical voices in the right to be able to go to Washington, to use any platforms they have. And I encourage people. If they killed Charlie Kirk, and 10,000 more Charlie Kirk should rise up. And this is what I'm capable of doing, and I hope that people are willing and have the courage to do what they're capable of doing. And I want to be honest with you, Todd. I am running to represent the values of Southwest Florida, to make sure that we fix the home costs down in this area, make sure we fix insurance costs with how ridiculous flood insurance is, to get the federal government out of our way so we can fix the Everglades, make sure this is a diversified economy. But also, I have a second agenda as well. It is time for the American people to go on full offense against the radical left. They are poisoning our country. They are perpetrating political violence all across the country. They have no values. All they want is power. And it is time for us to systematically dismantle the radical left. Every single vestige of their beliefs and and I call it their theology, because it's literally a religion to them, of being politically correct and policing people and trying to be involved in other people's affairs. We must destroy them and their ideology at every single turn. They cannot exist in the deep state. They have to be taken out in every form until we defeat their ideology so much that almost the entire country realizes this is bankrupt. This is ideologically bankrupt. There's no sense in this, and people just go back to being people who want this country to be on the best path. And sure, we can disagree about tax policy or how much we help the homeless. Those are common disagreements, but we cannot have people that are evil, that are trying to poison our food supply, poison the minds of our children, and take this country away from us. So that is my objective.
So you use the word dismantle, which I think is real, because it's all the NGOs. It's a whole infrastructure. It's a whole ecosystem that has to be dismantled. So how are you going to do that in Congress? And while you do that, I'm going to move to the shade because my system's overheating here. So go ahead.
No problem. I understand that, brother. Yeah, so one, I'm actually encouraged right now because we're calling it the Schumer shutdown with this government shutdown that's going on. But I really call it the Schumer gift. I'm not sure if your audience is familiar with Russ Vought.
Yes,
he's an incredible man. Yeah, he's the director of OMB. He's the director of Trump's budget office, and he has a significant amount of power right now because he can say what is essential and what is not essential, and they have a great opportunity to cut away so much of the fat that is the deep state and is the federal government. There are so many unelected federal bureaucrats that run around like miniature tyrants and ruin people's lives. There's supposed to be an apolitical workforce that answers to the political appointees, but as we saw in the Trump 1.0 and now in Trump 2.0, there are vestiges and absolute strongholds of the radical left inside of our government who, even though the president was elected with a massive mandate with the popular vote and by the electoral college, they want to subvert him at every single turn. So I'm excited to see what Russ Vought is capable of doing. I hope, I said I hope he uses a surgical knife to cut away the fat that is the deep state and the permanent Washington. But more so than that, he should use a chainsaw. These people have got to be taken out of positions. But when I get into office, one thing, I want to continue, part of Charlie's legacy, and I'm nowhere near as capable as he was, but to, be able to message to young people, to let people know that, hey, man, it is cool to be a conservative. If you want to be a rebel, get married young, have a lot of children, be a Christian, love your country, be strong, eat, non-processed foods, and be willing to stand up for yourself. That's the message that I want to bring. And then past that, I think that we need some real aggression from politicians in Washington, D.C. We have so many people that they're happy that the executive branch has grown into this untamable beast because they really don't have to legislate on anything difficult anymore. Oh, well, we'll have a really strong committee hearing. And we're going to bring that person in front of the committee and really grill them. No. Rulemaking is nowhere in the Constitution. If the people have to obey laws, and they're not even laws, they're what they're called, rules from these radical three-letter agencies, then we have given up our power as members of Congress. Obviously, we still have the power of the purse, and we don't even manage that well. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm almost certain that the last time we had a balanced budget, I was 16 months old. Everyone was worried about Y2K, and it was in 1996. That's ridiculous. And I'll tell you something wild. I literally just got a letter yesterday from the IRS, the Internal Revenue System, which we should have an ERS, the External Revenue System. We police all of the waterways. We make sure all the trade throughout the world can happen. The world should be paying us. Our citizens should not be having such massive tax burdens. But I just got a letter from them, and it is my tax return from 2023. And they said after looking into it, they didn't pay me enough, and so they sent me a check for something. Can you imagine what would happen if you, as a private citizen, didn't pay your taxes since 2023? The IRS would be at your door trying to take you to jail.
Yeah, that's so true. And then with the Chevron decision, Trump's starting to act on some of that, but Congress needs to, codify that more and more. And maybe when you get in there, you can work on that. What's been the response in Florida to what you're saying, your message?
So we launched our election, our campaign on October 1st, just a couple days ago, and it has been an incredible response, significantly better than we were even expecting. There was a lot of national news coverage, but also the local news coverage. And the last 2 days, we were out in the public. We went to a lot of different events, and man, to see how many people came up to me and were saying, "Hey, we've got your back. We want you in office. This is great. Any of the radical lies they say about you or all the stuff you were saying was true. We know you were right." It's been a very encouraging election start. And people in Southwest Florida, the thing I love about it so much is they're very shrewd. Most of them are very affluent, and they understand the federal government has gone way beyond what the Constitution imagined. The federal government should be involved in war, infrastructure, meaning interstates, things like that are going between states, and they should be interested in foreign trade deals. Aside from that, I want to empower our local governments and our state governments so that the policies that affect you are based on where you live and what you need in that district. There is no way that a centralized form of power can govern this nation from coast to coast, whether it's the Rust Belt that requires so much more updating to be able to make sure that they can start producing things again. Now that we've repealed NAFTA, making sure that we can bring industry back to America, or if it's places like California that need to be radically reassembled, and the violence has got to stop, and the crime-ridden cities there have got to be taken under control, or it's places that sustain a lot of tourism. It's diversifying their economies. You cannot manage that many different kind of places from Washington, D.C. It needs to be local. Your schools need to be led by the parents and led by what your community needs. There's a reason so many young people move away from where they are. It's because we have a one-size-fits-all education policy that does not work.
So, on that note, I think there's a bigger agenda with this shutdown and everything around it, and that Trump is using this as an opportunity to downsize the government, to get people out of the civil service, and maybe even deal with some of the larger issues. What say you about the shutdown? What's your opinion on that?
Again, like I said, I think this is a true gift to the Trump presidency. They'll be able to, hopefully, I think if Russ Vought is empowered enough, he'll be able to cut away so many of the abuse of federal funds, the waste of federal funds, and also get rid of a lot of these non-essential, completely non. I mean, ask your neighbors. Has your life majorly changed since the government shut down? Almost everyone would say no. They would say, no, my life hasn't changed at all. It just goes to show how little of the federal government is actually needed. And so I hope they do a lot. But also, I think it goes to a deeper message. The Democrats are obviously, playing a gambit, and it's completely because they're afraid of the radical left. Schumer is terrified that AOC is going to primary him. That's the reason he's now doing it. I think it was in March, and correct me if I'm wrong. No, it was in March that he said that he's going to vote for the continuing resolution so that we can make sure that, because it'd be too much damage to the American people to have the government shut down. But then just 6 months later, because he is only interested in power, all Democrats are only interested in power, not values. He is now going to appease his base so that he can stay in power and no other reason. And as we start thinking about that, I think, again, it goes to this deeper message of, we continue to have these continuing resolutions. I want to see a budget that represents the mandate that the Trump presidency was given, that as Donald Trump has, multiple times asked for. And I want to see members of Congress who are unafraid of the backlash they're going to face by slashing the scope of the federal government. That's something that we desperately need. But also, and forgive me for getting technical here, but we're facing a level of asymmetric warfare in this country.
Yes.
The political violence that is taking root, it needs to be handled in such an aggressive and hammer coming down way, a hammer and anvil tactic, where it just goes to show. I mean, we have people celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk, and the thing that drives me crazy with that is they call so many people on the left call him an extremist. That guy was a moderate compared to most of us. He was the nice guy. Yeah. And so now you're left to us. And I think this next generation of people that are going to be coming into office and coming into power are going to be much more conservative, much more shrewd, and much more aggressive about making this country back into a constitutional republic.
So I think one of the frustrations people have is that Congress really hasn't acted on a lot of the MAGA issues, haven't codified a lot of Trump's executive orders. We're starting to get some appointments through. But how would you help that process when you get into Congress?
I mean, I think the first and most glaring thing we noticed was that Congress refused to even touch the DOGE cuts. And I thought most of those were extremely reasonable, and they made a lot of sense. The Department of Government Efficiency was finding a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse. But it just goes to show how spineless and yellow-bellied most people in Congress, even on the right, actually are.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, We can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Your government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
And so things that I think we need to handle is, let's look, what is one of the most pressing problems that we have in our country right now? First, it is home ownership. My entire generation is priced out of the housing market. And the reason why is because of people like the EPA. The EPA is mandating all these rules and regulations that go onto home building products that drive the prices through the roof. And again, it's just overregulation. Here in Southwest Florida, we are facing a massive problem when it comes to home insurance. And again, we get hit by hurricanes left and right. But there is so many pieces of regulation that protect the insurance companies from true competition that it's really not a free market that is going on. And so people are able to raise the prices so much more. So one, I think we need to move regulations from almost every industry in this country, remove the majority of them. And then, there needs to be things that help everyday Americans. I'm a conservative, but I'm also, I would say I'm 40% a populist, 60% conservative, 40% populist. We need to have a government that works for our people. And if that means that we need to have, a non-refundable tax reduction or tax rebate that goes to people to help them afford flood insurance in these kinds of places, then we need to do it. Because if you start looking at it and from a macro perspective, you ask yourself, why do all liberals move to cities? Is it because there's expressions of art? Is it because, they want to be close to other people? I don't think that liberals move to cities. I think that cities create liberals. And let me explain why I think that. One, the majority of people that live in these major cities are renters. They don't actually own private property. And so when you're not invested in the dirt or in your soil or in the land that you actually live on, you don't really care about what housing markets are doing or what land value prices are looking like because you don't own any of it. And then you just want to say landlords are the bad guys. And, when it comes to people like BlackRock or Blackstone that are buying up single family homes, those guys definitely are the bad guys. But then when it also, in these major cities, people are so encouraged to have children later and later in life that, these people are, moving on to 35, 40 years old without producing any heirs. So they don't actually care about the future of the country because they don't have a vested interest in the next generation. And I think that's also why you see them being so willing to radicalize the youth of this country through the education system, which is just government indoctrination camps. And so that's one reason why I think we need to have a lot of populist policies that enable people to buy homes at young ages, enable them to own private property, and enable them to have dirt that they can call their own. And private property is one of the most revolutionary things that's ever happened in this world. And America is a major driving force of it. It just says that, hey, this is my castle. This is where I live. We are the royalty of this land. And one thing that I've got to push back on is when you have so many weak-kneed Christians around this country, and I'm a strong Christian, but I think the American Christian church bears a lot of blame for what's going on in our country because, one, they'll say, oh, well, we don't talk about, government or religion anywhere. That's made people very ineffective at being able to understand government and to understand what it's like to have a relationship with Christ. But also, they start quoting from Romans saying, well, we have to respect the authorities that are given above us. And so, if they want to be tyrannical and shut down the entire country for COVID, which is ridiculous, or if they want to, tax us to extreme measures, and I'm totally okay with that. But whenever people tell me that, or I hear a pastor say that, I say, well, what are the first few words of the preamble of the Constitution? We, the people, we are the authority in this country. It all comes down to us. And so, I think people need to stand up. And this is a reason, again, why I just think that we need to have effective communicators inside of Washington, D.C., who are unafraid to debate these radicals. I mean, you saw the way Charlie was so effective at turning people to the right-wing politics. I remember when he first started out his campus tours, he was a minority there. People were yelling at him. Now when he goes, whenever you have a leftist student go to the front, and which I thought was great that he allowed them to speak, but, he would have to calm the crowd down saying, hey, we outnumber these guys a lot. We want to hear their opinion so we can actually respond to it. And so I just think that, we have desperately got to carry on his message. But then inside of Washington, D.C., we have got to have politicians who are unafraid of bad news articles. I mean, that is the number one thing they fear is like, oh, well, I'll get a lot of bad press if I take this stance. If I want to, remove the National Firearms Act from law, if I want to lower taxes.
We
Go
want to
ahead.
give them bad press if they don't do the right thing. But go ahead.
Yeah, you guys need to see you're part of the solution. You're part of that parallel economy that's
Yeah.
been built for the last decade, and I appreciate the work you're doing. But we need to have people that are unafraid of taking arrows, because if you don't take the arrows are going to hit your citizens, and you don't need to worry about re-election. You need to worry about doing what's right. And so we need to have people that have, and my backbone is thankfully, reinforced by titanium. But we need to have people with some backbone in Washington who are going to be able to fight for us.
So you mentioned the Christian church. I completely agree. And there's a kind of a feminine Christianity that's been developed, and that's not what Christianity was in the beginning, and
Yep.
it's not what it should be in the future. Because anyway, there was a lot of masculinity in Christianity that we have to bring back. So that being said, and I want to move to Florida in a second, but one more question on the national issue. The wars have been a big problem for your generation and the coming generations. That they feel like they're fighting for somebody else, and they feel like the Congress is not effectively controlling what the president is doing, and also Congress has been cheerleading in a lot of the wars. So what's your response to that generation saying, I don't want a forever war. I want to protect my border and my family and my castle, and that's it?
So obviously it's a vote that comes up, I believe, once every Congress, and it's the authorization of authorized use of military force bill that comes up. And you can do a lot to help veterans in it. You can do a lot to help active duty military in it. And it's why so many people vote for these bills. Because, again, if we had single subject spending bills, I think Congress would be significantly more effective. But we create these omnibus packages where, hey, if you vote against this, which is basically going to authorize the country to go to war at all times, to be the police of the planet without gaining anything in return, then you're also voting on, voting against pay raises for our military. You're also voting against, more funding for their health care. You're also voting against things that are good that you want to do. And the reason they put all this stuff together, it's if you do vote against it, they get to go out and say, and they put these beautiful names on the bills, and it's like, oh, well, Madison Cawthorn voted against the Sunshine and Puppies bill because he hates sunshine and puppies. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, I voted against a bill that said they wanted to cut the tallywhackers off of 10-year-old boys.
Yeah.
But they do these things. And so we've got to have, I believe, single subject spending bills. And if we were able to do that, I think the authorized use of military force would be significantly different. And I think, I want us to have the greatest military ever created. I'm willing to fund the military until we have a Death Star. Like I'm excited for just having an awe-inspiring level of force. And I love what Pete Hegseth is doing with the military, bringing back masculinity, bringing back, the tried and true proven practices that make great warriors. But the thing that I do not like is when our military and then the blood of our children and then the riches of our country are wasted in forever wars that are simply there just to enrich the military industrial complex. And then we're doing it on behalf of other countries, which makes zero sense to me. We're for the last, 6 decades, we've been more worried about the borders of other countries than our own.
Yeah.
I think that when the United States goes to war, it should be very bad, and it should be very painful, and it should be very quick, but it should be for the interest of our country and the interest of our country alone. And so I'm a very anti-war person. I think that, we should be very shrewd with what we do. I don't mind shooting missiles at people who pose major threats to us. But if you want to put our sons and daughters in harm's way, then it better be for a reason that makes this country significantly better or safer, and that's it.
Completely agree, and we're going to stay on that subject. And by the way, I want to have you on again as your campaign develops. But you talked about doing the right thing. Let's move to Florida. There's a sense in the great state of Florida that maybe that doesn't always happen. That other interests are being put ahead of the citizens of Florida. You talked about the insurance issues. Can you deal with that from a national level at all, or what's your sense on that issue?
Yeah, I think one, we can introduce laws or tax rebates that are going to, make it easier for people to afford their insurance. But on another level, I think that we as a nation need to reduce regulation all around. And whether we're saying, hey, states, as a nation, we're no longer doing this, whether that requires, an amendment to the Constitution or what have you, we need to have a free market where people can compete for the dollars. And that way, because competition just breeds excellence, it breeds better customer service, it breeds lower prices, and it makes everything significantly better. And so that's, one way that I think we can tackle that. One is with tax rebates to make insurance cheaper. But then also when it comes to housing affordability in our district, we need to start looking at what we have, designated as wildlife areas, since most of those go through the state, but some of them are federal. We need to look at water quality issues that we have, because that's something that's driving housing prices down. I think that we should absolutely make it to where the governor is allowed to call for a national emergency. And whenever we have algae blooms, one, they're very dangerous for people's health. Two, they're really bad for our fisheries. And three, they really mess with home prices in the area. But also, we need to make it that young people can afford houses. I know I've already said this, but again, I think that this is a matter of our nation continuing to be free. I genuinely think it is that important. And so that goes down to the EPA when pulling back their scope of what they're allowed to regulate on. That goes down to, if we want to create, opportunity zones where people are allowed to open businesses and they're given, the ability to do that. I think the opportunity zones in the Trump's first term was one of the greatest ideas I've ever seen, because it helped low income places be able to become effective and competitive. And then when people are having more money brought into their communities, it normally allows the police force and the sheriff's department to have more money to be able to keep crime down, which then lets people say, hey, I feel safe enough to move my family to this area. And so instead of having a bunch of centralized places that are saying, oh, well, that's a nice community, that's a bad community. The reason people say that's a bad community is because, one, the schools suck, which I think we need to completely demolish the federal Department of Education, so that communities and parents have the last say on what their children need to be taught. I think that funding public schools is great, but I think the dollars need to follow the students. I believe in the freedom of education, and I believe that also I believe in the Parents' Bill of Rights, that no one should be able to say what your kid has to be injected with to be able to go to school. But I think that if we were to clean up most of our communities that are ridden with crime, to clean up our communities that have bad schools, to clean up our communities that don't have access to interstates or things like that, it would open up significantly more parts of the country and our district to say, hey, this is a nice area. You can move your family here. That way you have more places to have homes. And that way it drives the price down, and then people feel comfortable having more children. Because, I think, so many people on the left say that there are too many people on the planet and we're overpopulated. Well, I completely agree with Elon Musk. I think we are increasingly underpopulated.
Yes.
I think that we need to encourage people to have children. And whether that's saying, hey, if you have 6 children, you have a stable home with a father and a mother who love their children, then and you have that many kids, then sure, go ahead and remove their income taxes. Make it so that they can just be well taken care of. Encourage these people to have families. That's a massive thing we need.
Madison, thank you. How do people help your campaign, get in touch with you, all of that? What's the website, everything?
Absolutely. Go to MadisonCawthorn.com. And again, I just want to leave people with, I'm here to fight for you. I am here to go to Washington, D.C. to keep the federal government off your back, to reduce regulation, to make sure you get to keep your tax dollars in your pocket. And I'm also there to make sure that, we can attack all the issues that's facing Southwest Florida, whether that's water quality issues with what's going on, from Lake Okeechobee coming down into the Everglades and down our rivers, whether that's housing affordability, the cost of insurance, bettering our schools, making sure our teachers get higher pay, making sure we attract the best and brightest for our teachers, and also making sure that we have a diversified economy. And I think we can do that with removing regulations and increasing opportunity zones all around the country. But we need to have an economy that serves our people, so there are jobs for our children when they grow up. That and I want to make our economy so strong. I want to make the U.S. dollar so strong that we are capable, and that's going to involve auditing the Federal Reserve and potentially destroying the Federal Reserve. I know that's a radical thing to say, but I think the Federal Reserve, with their quantitative easing, is a massive plague unto humanity. But strengthening the U.S. dollar so much that whether it's the man or the woman going to work, you can afford to have a family of 4, multiple cars, go on a vacation, live in a nice home, pay that home off, and do it all on a single income. That's what I believe. And, I think that people should be allowed to do almost whatever they want, so long as it does not hurt someone else's property or someone else's person, and it does not poison the minds of our youth.
Fantastic. Madison, we'll have you back. I appreciate you coming on today.
Excellent, Todd. I really appreciate it, sir. Have a good one.
Ciao. Bye.